Alright everyone, I've decided to make a 4-part little mini-series here on trying to inoculate people against certain types of propaganda that are being actively deployed by the legacy media, and I wouldn't be surprised if the legacy entertainment industry follows suit. The political establishment's done this for a long time, so they're just adapting older methods. I do need your help, though, in spreading awareness of this, because the entire point of this 4-part mini-series, I'll do parts 1 and 2 today, the next 2 tomorrow. I'm going to break it up a little bit. I'm not going to make 4 videos on similar topics in the same day. I just wouldn't have the focus. I need your help in spreading it around as much as possible, because the whole point is to make people aware of it, because propaganda begins not to work so well when people are aware of what's going on. I think I can explain it in terms that people will get, maybe more than if they were getting it from somebody who was like super academic about it. It might be kind of dry and a little too lengthy or something. So I'm going to try to keep these videos actually a little bit on the shorter side, which by my standards is different from most people's standards, but I'll try. The first method is one-dimensionality. I mentioned this briefly in my last video. Essentially, the goal of this particular tactic is that you've crafted a narrative about a person that is simply one-dimensional. They are either all good or all evil, and therefore any criticism or adoration aimed at them, any remark that can be made about them, that fits the narrative, of course, immediately becomes canonical. If you, for instance, have spun a narrative about somebody that they are racist, a Nazi, a bigoted, horrible individual, most people then can be prevented from ever at least openly endorsing anything they happen to say, and you can create a one-dimensional caricature of them that is clearly not part of reality. There is no person in the world that has no redeeming facets. That includes people who generally are agreed upon as evildoers. This would include even people like serial killers and things. They typically are rendered into the one-dimensional as well. It also includes people who are heroic figures. We would have a view, you know, sort of the patriotic view of maybe our founders or something. Well, some of these people had their own strange quirks. Andrew Jackson, the narrative about him, a very large, physically imposing, stalwart individual, but at the same time, you know, he would get completely wasted and vandalize people's bars. And so he wasn't necessarily always a likable character. Sometimes he had one too many brews, and then the bar magically burned to the ground overnight where he was staying. And that's what happens. But if at the time you had gone against the general narrative of him, the way he was perceived of, by most at least, would have been difficult. Now, sometimes you have a split narrative. You can even have a dichotomous narrative. Like the political narrative within the United States is that people who are Democratic partisans say, well, Democrats are invariably much better, if not perfect. Republicans are slime, basically. They're controlled by corporations. They want to steal your ovaries. For a Republican partisan, well, the Republican Party stands for small government, liberty, and all this stuff, and the Democrats are like evil commies. They want to enslave you. Neither of these views of reality is correct. But within those echo chambers, the other side, and in some cases, their own side, has been rendered to the one-dimensional. And so you've got a situation here. I'll give you an example that I see very frequently. Here's how you can tell people are part of that propaganda-driven echo chamber, specifically on the left. People on the left who say, well, you know, Miss Clinton has alienated people. You're talking about the person saying it has to be a Democrat, known Democratic partisan and or liberal. So they're on the left. It's not that they're against the Democratic Party. They may have no problem with its general platform. They may be fully in support of it. They vote straight Democrat. They vote to donate to Democratic causes. But then they criticize Hillary Clinton, say, well, she ran a shitty campaign. The right is kind of correct when they're saying this. Aha, Russian troll bot, comes the chorus of other people who have been completely indoctrinated. They're incapable of criticizing the Democratic Party because they've been taught any criticism of it is purely wrong, cannot possibly be accurate. I see this on the right as well. I see people who are stalwart Trump fans. And if you say, well, Trump has stepped in it, he's said something that's, he's suggesting something that is not a good idea, like CIA black sites or rescinding the Cuba deal, which I've pointed out myself. And all of a sudden you get people who are like, no, MAGA, MAGA, Trump is the greatest, he can do no wrong, saying, oh, you've slipped up, come back to true Trumpism. Now, you could be just analyzing things, you're giving your honest perspective, but the echo chamber automatically seeks to absorb all. An echo chamber seeks to absorb anybody who has maybe common sense and doesn't 100% overlap with some ideology that has become an echo chamber, thus rendering itself and everything external to it one-dimensional, and it also creates a false dichotomy. The two dipoles within these systems, if there's a dipole at all, and it's not just a solid echo chamber like, 6 degree of Hitler sort of stuff, they look at the other dipole, which is also an echo chamber, and say, well, that is everything evil and wrong with the world, we are everything virtuous and good. And because they oppose one another, they get more and more strong over time as well, or they can at least do so. Once you have rendered, I'll give you examples here. The legacy media seeks to render elements of the alt media as, well, these are essentially probably controlled by Russia. They are propagandists, they're also sellouts, and they are Nazis, they would say about the more right-leaning segments of the alt media. If they're talking about the left-wing segments of the alt media, and you've got to realize the legacy media is the dipole to the alt media. It has nothing to do with political affiliation, it has to do with money-making ventures on their part. This is the overarching important topic that everyone needs to understand. When they're looking at it, if they're looking at the left-wing, say, well, they're too far out there, they have non-pragmatic left-wing solutions. The DNC or the old guard of the left-wing media represents legitimate ideas about what leftism should be. These are all zealots, they're fanatics, that they would crush our party if they ever had significant sway, like over our political process. They say this all the time about the left-wing segment of the alt media. Anything beyond the Young Turks, they won't tolerate. They would look at H.A. Goodman or some of these other people and say, well, those are fanatics. Those people, we can't allow them to have significant sway. Well, we have to suppress them any way possible. The legacy media now, more actively than before, is trying to do this. The reason that they seek to create these narratives of one-dimensionality among ideologies or groups of ideologies, and it goes hand in hand. This is only effective against somebody like myself or Sargon or something, if you're trying to combine us with people who we don't really share a great degree of ideological overlap with. The fact that we're all YouTubers, we're sort of anti-PC, has nothing to do with further political ideology. So it requires further methods to attack those people that are not actually on any fringe. When it comes to those that are actually on some fringe, so-called, it becomes a little bit easier, because you simply have to call them one-dimensional. Like, for instance, we'll take everyone's favorite boogeyman, Richard Spencer, as an example. Richard Spencer in his personal life, I'm sure, has all sorts of hobbies and things that he does and talks about that have nothing to do with race or politics. But if you suggest that that's the fact, you will be called a Richard Spencer fan, likened to him, and considered fanatic by default because you've pointed that out, because it goes completely against the narrative that all he does all day is look at his tiki torch collection. That's all, it's a caricature. It can't possibly be accurate. There's no one in the world who is as stereotypical as the sort of one-dimensional caricatures that these narratives actually prescribe. It is impossible for someone to be that purely Shakespearean. They would have to be not only a method actor, but they would have to be totally unrepentant. They would have to be like Nero on steroids at that point in order to actually fulfill what's being said about them. Nobody can fulfill it. Certainly not somebody who's primarily, like, they do a podcast, a YouTube channel or something. It's just not going to happen. The most skilled politician would have extreme difficulty with keeping up that sort of method acting lifestyle in order to be sort of the one-dimensional caricature ascribed to them. But again, it can be positive too. And wasn't it Malcolm X that said, be careful or the media will have you hating the people you should be loving? Like you would go against the people that actually, had your back, and you would start hating people that were lying to you openly. I think he was referring to the media at the time. I kind of botched the quote, but, whatever. You get the basic point. That's basically what's happening. There are a lot of people, for instance, that consider themselves liberal or left-wing, progressive, whatever. And they trust corporations to tell them the truth over people who are actually independent within the alt media, including people who are on the left. They won't trust them either. No, they'd rather trust CNN or something. There are people on the right that actually believe that the Republican Party stands for small government. My goodness, how possibly fooled can you be? It's not true. It's just a narrative about them that they've spun either about themselves or about somebody else. And once these echo chamber narratives are created, it becomes very difficult to convince anybody who's even loosely part of them that they're totally fucking wrong. That's the propaganda. It's the power of propaganda. It skews their reality. The reality that they see in the political and social world around them with their fellow human beings is totally wrong. It's totally false. It's a storybook. They're saying they're hypnotized in the most literal sense. They're not even seeing what's real. It's amazing how this can be accomplished so easily with the human mind. They would rather listen to people who get paid seven-figure salaries by people who have billions of dollars and multinational ties ramble about some issue than somebody who's actually an independent private citizen. Then they will, at the same time, turn around and say that that same citizen journalist or independent analyst who's making, 5 figures, crowdfunding or whatever, is a sellout while listening to those same 7-figure pundits. Now, isn't that interesting? You see, a lot of people have never thought of it that way. If only they would, they'd see how ridiculous that is, I think. But a lot of people, they won't even allow themselves to question the narrative. They're so wrapped up in it. They're so wrapped up in the false reality that's been spun around them, they can't even question it personally. If they try to, they get their cognitive dissonance kicks in. They can't even question. It's like there's a wall in front of their mind. What they really need is some deprogramming. What they really need is to have the brainwashing broken. But a lot of these people, and they're never going to try to do that. They'd probably have to go to a hypnotherapist, some of these people. They're so enraptured by their own, the false view of reality. They'd probably have to get mesmerized to get past it. That's the funny part. They've been literally mind-fucked in some of these cases. So that's the first way the legacy media goes after the alt media, through one-dimensionality. So when you get a view of somebody, including someone you disagree with, like you're on the left, you're reading something about someone on the right. You're on the right, you're reading something about someone or some group on the left. If it sounds one-dimensional, if it sounds like a storybook caricature, it is not entirely true. At the very least, it lies by omission. It probably contains some half-truths as well. It may be a total and complete lie. You got to be aware of that if you want a true view, honestly, of reality. That's about all. Peace out.